This is Mrs. Miller, your teacher at ELA Academy. Welcome to the latest installment in my series on annotating effectively. If you haven't watched Annotation 101 yet, I recommend doing so before you watch this video. Today, we'll look at effective annotations for Act 1, Scene 1 of The Crucible, a play by Arthur Miller. This play is often assigned as summer reading for AP Lang or as a unit during the school year for American literature. In Annotation 101, we talked about the most common types of annotations, with examples of how they can be done well or poorly. If I had to give you just one piece of advice for writing better annotations, it would be to ask and answer the question why. Always dig deeper beyond the first idea that occurs to you when you set out to write an annotation. We will look at one of each type today in the Crucible. First up is historical context. Let's look at a couple of excerpts from the beginning of Scene 1. Remember that a play includes stage directions and other information that help readers and actors understand more about how the lines are spoken and what subtext accompanies them. Here we have a note about the setting. We're in a bedroom in Reverend Samuel Parris's house, Salem, Massachusetts, in the spring of the year 1692. If that doesn't ring any bells for you, you can look it up. What you would discover is that this play is set during the Salem witch trials. It was a time of hysteria about witchcraft, when the people of Salem saw witchcraft everywhere they looked, causing every bad thing that happened and lurking even in the hearts of people who were thought very righteous and good. Many people were hanged for witchcraft by the time the hysteria subsided. By the way, witch trials were not limited to Salem. Look it up sometime. Also, Arthur Miller openly stated that he was comparing the Salem witch trials to a type of witch trials in his own time that he himself was caught up in, the Second Red Scare, which was a heightened sense of fear that communists were infiltrating American society in the 1940s. It became known as McCarthyism after its most well-known supporter, Senator Joe McCarthy. So when you read this play, keep in mind that the playwright intended it as a criticism of the communist hunts of his own time. Scene 1 begins with Reverend Parris praying over his daughter Betty, who seems to be almost comatose. Susanna comes in with word from the doctor. He bid me tell you that you might look to unnatural things for the cause of it. We can tie this comment back to the note about the Salem witch trials by asking a question. What kind of unnatural things is Susanna referring to? I infer that the doctor is suggesting that witchcraft made Betty sick. What you discover a little later is that the Reverend caught Betty, her cousin, and a bunch of other girls dancing in the forest with something in a pot that looked suspiciously like witch's brew. One of the girls was even naked. Can you imagine what it would look like for a Reverend's own daughter to look like she was involved with witchcraft? I wonder how he'll respond to this. Will he try to cover it up? Will he denounce his daughter and niece so that he can keep his own reputation clean? Next up is plot. As we continue reading, Mr. and Mrs. Putnam come in and reveal that their daughter Ruth is in the same condition as Betty, which doesn't look good at all. Let's look at the text. Anne. Reverend Parris, I have laid 7 babies unbaptized in the earth. Believe me, sir, you never saw more hardy babies born. And yet each would wither in my arms the very night of their birth. And now this year, my Ruth, my only... I see her turning strange. A secret child she has become this year, and shrivels like a sucking mouth were pulling on her life, too. And so I thought to send her to your Tituba. To Tituba? What made Tituba? Tituba knows how to speak to the dead, Mr. Parris. Goody Anne, it is a formidable sin to conjure up the dead. A bit later, Parris turns to his niece Abigail, who had previously denied that any witchcraft had been done in the forest. Then you were conjuring spirits last night. Not I, sir, not I. Tituba and Ruth. Now I am undone. You are not undone. Let you take hold here. Wait for no one to charge you. Declare it yourself. You have discovered witchcraft. In my house? In my house, Thomas? They will topple me with this. What we have revealed here in these excerpts are a number of conflicts. First, we discover that Anne Putnam has lost 7 babies in childbirth. It isn't hard to understand how painful that must have been, and we can see that she is on a quest to discover the reason for their deaths. She's also afraid of losing her one surviving child, who has been acting strangely in the past year and doesn't look very healthy. She assumes that the only explanation is witchcraft, since all of the babies looked very healthy before they died. Next conflict, we learn later in this scene that witchery is a hanging error. So if somebody has conjured spirits, they might get the death penalty. For such a serious consequence, it seems odd that Anne would openly admit that she sent her own daughter to conjure the spirits of her dead siblings, even if it's for the noble purpose of exposing the witch who killed them, as Anne thinks. This is a serious problem for everyone involved: Tituba, Ruth, Anne, and all the girls who participated along with them. Third, Reverend Parris believes that he has enemies who will use this scandal to bring him down. That seems a little weird. A reverend who has enemies? I wonder what he's doing to earn them. And perhaps most importantly, he doesn't seem to realize that Thomas Putnam is emphasizing the problem for Parris's household in order to take attention off of what Anne herself did. We learn elsewhere that Thomas Putnam is the wealthiest man in Salem. He owns a lot of land and comes from a long line of wealthy landowners who, as he said, peopled the province. It looks like he and Anne aren't worried about obeying the law themselves, but he sure is manipulating Parris to think he's the only one with a problem. Now let's look at the author's use of language. Anne says, "Reverend Parris, I have laid 7 babies unbaptized in the earth. Believe me, sir, you never saw more hardy babies born. And yet each would wither in my arms the very night of their birth. They were murdered, Mr. Parris, and mark this proof, mark it. Last night my Ruth were ever so close to their little spirits. I know it, sir. For how else is she struck dumb now except some power of darkness would stop her mouth? It is a marvelous sign, Mr. Parris." Now, before, we've only talked about diction and syntax in this category, but today we'll add logical fallacies. A logical fallacy is a problem with somebody's reasoning. Anne commits the fallacy of leaping to conclusions, sometimes called the foregone conclusion. Because of the culture she grew up in, Anne is predisposed to believe that any negative occurrence that she can't explain must be due to witchcraft. Now, why is that a fallacy? Just because her babies seemed healthy when they were born but then died doesn't necessarily mean that a witch killed them. There might be a medical cause that they simply didn't have the knowledge or technology to detect. These days, we'd be more likely to suspect sudden infant death syndrome or some kind of genetic problem rather than witchcraft. Also, just because Ruth isn't speaking doesn't mean a witch is stopping her mouth. She and Betty might be trying to get attention or trying to avoid getting into trouble, since Reverend Parris caught them breaking rules that have serious consequences. Perhaps they think that if they look like the victims of witchcraft, they won't look so much like witches themselves. So why does the author have Anne use these logical fallacies? It helps to show the shaky logical foundations of the witch hunt, and the shaky logical foundations of the witch hunt in his own time, McCarthyism. Now let's look at personal connections. In this excerpt, we see that Rebecca Nurse, a well-respected older lady in town, is trying to calm everyone down. Whereas Anne is constantly on the verge of hysteria, Rebecca is calm and rational. "Pray calm yourselves. I have 11 children, and I am 26 times a grandma, and I have seen them all through their silly seasons. And when it comes on them, they will run the devil bow-legged keeping up with their mischief. I think she'll wake when she tires of it." "This is no silly season, Rebecca. My Ruth is bewildered, Rebecca. She cannot eat." Perhaps she is not hungered yet. Now for my personal connection. I've seen differences like this between parents with one child and parents with many. A lot of parents are very nervous and overprotective of their first child, and as they have more, they get more and more relaxed as they learn from experience what's a big deal and what isn't. Now remember that we don't stop with our personal connection. We need to use it to understand the characters and the plot better. Let's think about what we've learned about Rebecca. She has raised or helped to raise 37 children and is well aware that they can be dramatic. She knows from experience that it's best just to ignore the behavior. If you make a big deal out of it, you're just giving them the attention they want and encouraging them to continue being dramatic. Anne disagrees, but she's only raised one child, and that one is only about 10 years old. She doesn't have the kind of experience Rebecca does, and she's taking Ruth's drama seriously. We can also see some conflict between Anne and Rebecca. Anne resents the other woman for being so richly blessed with children when she herself has lost all but one. And she really doesn't like Rebecca seeming to flaunt her blessing by talking about her superior experience, whether Rebecca means it that way or not. As we continue reading, we will see this resentment continue to fester. Here's the last one for today, literary devices. After hearing that Reverend Paris has sent for Reverend Hale, who is famous for discovering and hanging witches, to come check over Betty, Rebecca Nurse says, "There is prodigious danger in the seeking of loose spirits. I fear it. I fear it." The literary device we see here is foreshadowing. Now, of course, we aren't just going to write the word foreshadowing in the margin, but we're going to dig deeper. What exactly is being foreshadowed, and what else can we learn? Rebecca seems to be the voice of reason here, and she doesn't seem like the type of person who exaggerates. So if she thinks a witch hunt presents prodigious danger, then she predicts truly bad outcomes. And we already know that the actual Salem witch trials ended in executions. How likely is it that her fears will come true? Unfortunately, we do see characters scared and emotional and hiding things, which is not a recipe for making rational decisions. It looks like their hysteria and their preconceived notions will feed the hunt, even if it isn't warranted. That's all we have time for today. Watch for part 2 of this lesson, in which we'll look at the other annotation types. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. And of course, check out my blog for helpful resources that go with each and every video. This is ELA Academy.